Millionaire paid fortunes to cure his son until she arrived and did the impossible. Some houses are built from glass and steel, rising proudly into the sky, catching every glimmer of sunlight. But some houses, no matter how bright they appear outside, are filled with darkness within. The mansion of Ethan Walker was one of those places. He was a celebrated architect, the man who shaped the skyline, as the media called him. His buildings stood as monuments of brilliance and precision. But behind those transparent walls lived a shattered soul. 3 years ago, his wife Laura died in a car accident. Since that day, their 6-year-old son, Lucas, had fallen into silence. No words, no laughter, no eye contact. The boy sat in the corner of his room, clutching a small silver toy car, eyes hollow as if the world had drained out of him. Ethan tried everything. He hired top therapists, child psychologists, and behavioral experts. He poured millions into rehabilitation programs. Nothing worked. Lucas lived in his own world, one without sound, without light, without his father. By day, Ethan buried himself in work. He designed new towers, signed contracts, attended ceremonies. But every night when he returned home, the halls of his mansion echoed only with the sound of the wind. The staff moved softly, afraid to startle the boy. At night, when everyone else was asleep, Ethan would stand silently outside Lucas's door. He listened, longing for a single sound, a sigh, even the faintest breath. But behind that door was only silence. Sometimes he reached for the handle, wanting to go in, but stopped midway. He feared that empty gaze, the one that tore his heart apart. Many nights Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at unfinished blueprints spread across the desk. He whispered to himself, "I can build towers that touch the clouds, so why can't I build a bridge to reach my own sun?" The lamp's glow cast deep shadows on his tired face, the face of a man who once conquered the world, now defeated by the walls of his own home. On the wall hung a photograph. Laura smiling softly, her hand on Ethan's shoulder, Lucas beaming in her arms. Now, every time Ethan passed by, he turned away, because that smile had become his deepest wound. One morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, scattering across the cold marble floor. Ethan sat by the window, a cup of coffee untouched. Behind the closed door down the hall, Lucas remained hidden in his silence. Ethan knew this day would be like every other, long, quiet, and hollow. What he didn't know was that just a few hours later, a quiet woman with an old suitcase would walk through the back gate and change everything. That morning, the sky was a still shade of blue, so pure one could almost hear the wind brushing against the tall glass windows of the Walker mansion. Sunlight spilled down, spreading like a sheet of gold over the marble steps. And amid all that elegance, a woman quietly entered through the back gate, pulling a worn suitcase behind her. Her steps were slow, as though afraid to disturb the fragile silence around her. That was Maria Evans. No one in the house took notice of her arrival. Here, people had grown used to silence, the thick kind that seeped into every corner, muffling even the sound of breathing. Maria had been hired as the new maid. She was soft-spoken, greeting everyone with a polite bow, her eyes hiding something too deep to be named. Every fine line on her face, every faint movement at the corner of her lips, carried a weary gentleness, the fragile beauty of someone who had endured what time could not erase. No one knew she had once been a child therapist, devoting her youth to healing young souls swallowed by darkness. But one false accusation during a treatment destroyed everything: her career, her reputation, and the little daughter of 3 she loved more than life itself. Since that day, Maria changed her name, changed her city, carrying only a small, trembling hope that one day she might again hear her child call her mom. When she stepped into Ethan Walker's mansion, Maria made herself 3 silent promises. No attachments, no curiosity, no past shall cross this threshold. Her job was simple: cleaning, washing, cooking, and keeping silent. But on that very first morning, while she was mopping the living room floor, she felt someone watching her. From behind the long cream curtains, a small pair of eyes peeked out, dark, round, and full of fear. It was Lucas. He stood still, clutching a faded toy car. Sunlight caught his soft hair, and his little shoulders trembled. Maria paused, but did not move closer. She understood that in the world of wounded children, any haste was another wound waiting to open. So she simply continued working. Each stroke of her mop was slow and tender, as if wiping away an invisible sadness. As the soft swish of the broom blended with the wind through the window, Maria began humming an old lullaby, the same one she used to sing to her daughter on quiet country nights. Her voice was thin as smoke, warm yet sorrowful, drifting into the air like a breath. Lucas heard it. He didn't run away. He just stood there, watching, as though that fragile sound had touched some distant place, a place where he had once felt safe. Then Lucas stepped back, hiding again behind the curtain, and disappeared. Maria didn't turn around. She didn't ask. She only smiled faintly, a smile as delicate as early autumn sunlight, fleeting yet inexplicably warm. The next day, as she climbed the stairs, Maria saw Lucas again. He was sitting by the hallway railing on the second floor, his toy car glinting softly in his hand. Maria stopped gently and greeted him with a nod, her gaze light as air. No words, no touch, no comfort, just a quiet presence, sincere and kind, like the lingering warmth of dusk. Something in the house began to change. The air grew lighter, footsteps less cautious. Something was shifting, quietly but truly. Maria didn't know that her serene kindness was slowly melting the ice that had sealed the boy's heart. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen, she noticed a glass of milk left untouched on the table. The old cook sighed. "It's Lucas's. The boy never drinks it." Maria said nothing. Later that night, when the house had fallen silent, she poured a fresh glass of milk and quietly placed it on the hallway corner where she had seen him sit. No words, no look, just one small act, enough to send a simple message. "I see you, and I'm here." The next morning, the glass was empty. Maria only smiled softly. And in that house, once heavy with shadows, a small ray of light had begun to slip in. Since the morning the first glass of milk went empty, something subtle had shifted in the air of the house. No one else noticed, but Maria could feel it. The silence seemed lighter now, as if the cold walls themselves had learned how to breathe again. She worked as she always did. Every morning Maria rose before sunrise, opened the windows wide, and let the golden light flood in, spreading warmth across the once frozen marble floors. The rays of sun danced softly on the surface, tracing shapes like the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat. And sometimes, at the end of the hallway, Lucas would stand there, silent and still, watching her. He no longer hid. He no longer ran away. He simply watched, his small hand clutching the toy car, his eyes trembling between fear and curiosity. Maria didn't speak. She only tilted her head gently, a greeting without sound. No words were needed, only that steady gentleness, the only language two broken hearts could share. Day after day, a wordless rhythm formed between them. Each night, Maria would place a glass of milk by the hallway corner, and by morning, it would always be empty. She never mentioned it, never asked, but deep down, she knew. Someone was answering. One afternoon, as she polished the tall glass windows, she caught a reflection. Lucas sitting quietly on the rug, eyes fixed on her. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't hiding. He simply watched. Maria didn't turn. She continued wiping slowly, each stroke calm and even, as if the soft rhythm of her movements had become their first shared language. That evening, when she left the milk as usual, she folded a small handkerchief and placed it beside the glass, embroidered with a tiny floral pattern, a silent way of saying, "I see you, and I'm here." The next morning, both the milk and the handkerchief were gone. Maria smiled, and within her chest a fragile warmth flickered to life. Faint, but enough to remind her she could still feel. In the days that followed, Lucas began to appear more often. He still didn't speak, but he no longer avoided her gaze. Sometimes, when she cleaned the staircase, he would sit a few steps away, rolling his toy car back and forth, glancing at her from time to time. Neither of them spoke, yet the distance between them seemed to shrink with every shared silence, as if quiet itself had become a bridge between two souls left behind by life. One late afternoon, while Maria was hanging sheets to dry in the garden, the breeze caught the white fabric, sending it billowing like soft clouds in sunlight. Then came a sound, the faint clatter of wheels rolling over stone. Maria turned slightly. Across the yard, Lucas stood watching her, his toy car in hand. He didn't speak, but in his eyes something new appeared. A light, small but real. Maria didn't move toward him. She simply smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself since stepping into this house. From the upstairs window, Ethan Walker happened to see them. He stood still, the afternoon light softening the sharpness of his face. And for the first time in years, he thought, perhaps, just perhaps, this house had begun to breathe again. That afternoon, the sky hung low, draped in a quiet gray that pressed softly upon the house. Rain began to fall, fine, silvery threads tapping against the windows, a rhythm so gentle it felt like the air itself was whispering. The Walker mansion rested in stillness. Only the ticking of the old clock filled the space, steady, patient, marking time that had long stood still since the day laughter vanished from these walls. Maria had just finished cleaning the kitchen. Her hands were tired, but her heart felt light, strangely calm. She sank onto the rug beside the fireplace, where the dim glow of embers painted her face in warm gold. Through the window, she watched the rain veil the garden, soft, steady, endless. For the first time in years, she felt the peace of belonging, even if just a fragile echo of it. And then, through that silence, a sound stirred. Not the wind, not the rain. A small, delicate sound, the wheels of a toy car rolling across the wooden floor. Maria's eyes opened. Standing at the edge of the room was Lucas. He wore a gray sweater, his hair slightly damp, his cheeks flushed from the chill. In his tiny hands, he held a plastic toy stethoscope. He stepped forward, one cautious step after another. Slow, deliberate, as if each movement was a leap across fear itself. Maria didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She knew that any sudden motion might break the spell forming between them. Lucas stopped a few feet away, his eyes lifted to hers, clear, trembling, yet glimmering like sunlight breaking through after rain. Then, carefully, he raised the toy stethoscope and placed it against her chest. He leaned in, ear pressed against the other end, listening. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. And within that silence, there was only the steady rhythm of her heart. Then came a voice, small, trembling, and pure. "I'll heal you, Mommy." Maria froze. Time itself seemed to stop. She looked down at him, her lips parting soundlessly, her chest tightening as tears gathered in her eyes. He had spoken, after all those years of silence. He had spoken. Not Daddy, not help me, but Mommy. One word, and it shattered the years of quiet that no wealth, no science, no effort could ever pierce. Maria didn't dare move. She feared that if she reached out, this fragile miracle would dissolve like smoke. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, trembling, "Yes, I hear you." Lucas pressed the stethoscope closer, his little brow furrowed with concentration. He listened, really listened, as though he could hear not just her heartbeat, but his own reflected inside it. And in his eyes, for the first time, there was no fear. There was trust. The door creaked open. Ethan Walker stood there, frozen. The man who once ruled boardrooms and built towers now trembled like a child before what he saw. He had waited years to hear his son's voice, yet never imagined that the miracle would come from the hands of a stranger. Lucas didn't see him. He stayed close to Maria, whispering again, soft and certain, "You'll be okay, Mommy. I'll fix you." Ethan's chest constricted. He wanted to speak, to call out, but no sound came, because deep down, he knew this moment didn't belong to him. A tear slid down his cheek, not from pain alone, but from the mingling of joy, envy, and aching gratitude. Maria remained still, her hand resting lightly on the boy's. Two broken hearts, one that had forgotten how to love, one that had never learned, now beat together as one. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless. And inside the house that had known only silence, a new sound was born, the sound of life finding its way back. Since that rainy afternoon, the atmosphere inside the Walker mansion had changed. Sounds once thought to be lost forever began to return. Lucas's soft laughter, Maria's quiet humming as she cleaned. The house, once as cold as a tomb, now seemed to be learning how to breathe again. Ethan noticed it every day. Each time he passed through the hallway and saw his son sitting near Maria, his gaze softened. Some evenings he would stand by the living room door, watching the two of them by the fireplace, the boy listening intently as Maria read in a hushed voice. And a strange feeling stirred inside him, warm yet aching. He knew he should thank the woman, but the more he watched her, the more he sensed something beyond gratitude, something undefined, a blend of thankfulness, envy, and longing. However, not everyone in the house welcomed that change with joy. Victoria, the housekeeper who had served the Walker family for more than 10 years, noticed it first. Since Maria's arrival, the master's gaze had changed. The man who had always been distant and cold now occasionally stopped to exchange gentle words with Maria, even smiled, something Victoria hadn't seen since Madame Laura passed away. Victoria observed in silence. She was a woman of middle age, stern and composed, always the one to keep order in the house. But beneath that calm exterior lay years of quiet devotion and loneliness. Throughout her years serving Ethan, Victoria had developed a feeling she could never quite name. Part respect, part pity, and gradually, love. So when she saw Maria, a stranger, walk in and bring the light she herself had never been able to create, a small flame of jealousy began to smolder in her heart. At first, she only watched. But every time she saw Ethan glance at Maria or heard Lucas's laughter echoing from the kitchen, the calm inside her cracked a little more. What has she done to win their trust so quickly? Victoria wondered, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Curiosity, mingled with jealousy, kept Victoria from sleeping. One evening she sat alone in her small, neat and frigid room, a mirror of herself, and opened her laptop. She typed a short message to an old acquaintance who once worked in the Civil Investigation Department. "I need information about someone named Maria Evans, as soon as possible." A few days later she received an envelope. Inside were hastily printed sheets, the ink still smelling fresh. The name Maria Evans didn't appear in any medical record, but the real name did. Isabel Moore, a pediatric nurse once accused of malpractice in a child treatment case, stripped of her medical license, deprived of custody of her own child, and vanished from the city nearly 6 years ago. Victoria sat in silence for a long time, her hand gripping the edge of the paper. She changed her name, used a false identity, hid her past. In her mind, the scattered pieces began to fit together. Maria's silence, her eyes that always avoided direct gaze, her refusal to talk about her life. Each fragment led to one conclusion. Maria was a liar. From that day on, Victoria didn't just watch anymore. She began to sow small, quiet remarks, soft enough to seem harmless, yet sharp enough to linger in others' minds. "She's quite talented, isn't she? Children seem to cling to her wherever she goes. Strange, I've never seen any official papers for her from the agency." Then one night, she decided to act. Ethan had just returned from a long meeting, looking weary. As he sat down, Victoria entered with his coffee, as she always did. The warm yellow light of the desk lamp fell across his face and illuminated an old photograph. Laura and Lucas, in their brighter days. Victoria set the cup down and spoke softly, evenly. "Mr. Walker, I know you're glad Lucas is improving, but perhaps you should be a little more cautious." Ethan looked up, surprised. Cautious about what? She lowered her gaze, took a folded sheet of paper from her pocket, and placed it on the desk. "I mean no disrespect, sir, but you should know. That woman's name isn't Maria Evans. Her real name is Isabel Moore." The air thickened instantly. Ethan frowned slightly. Victoria continued, her tone calm and measured, but every word fell heavy between them. "She used to be a nurse, lost her license for malpractice involving children. The court also took away her parental rights. Then she disappeared. Now she's here, with a new name, pretending nothing ever happened." "Do you really think that's someone we can trust?" Ethan sat motionless. Her words dropped like pebbles into the calm water of his heart, sending ripples across the surface. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to believe what he had seen. Maria's gentle eyes, Lucas's laughter. But a voice of reason whispered within him. What if Victoria is right? Victoria lowered her voice further, almost tenderly. "I only care about the boy, sir. We can't let anyone with a troubled past get too close to him. You understand?" She turned and left, leaving the crumpled paper in Ethan's trembling hand. The room sank into silence, broken only by the dry, cold ticking of the clock. Outside, the rain began to fall. Ethan stared at the paper, then at his reflection in the glass. In his eyes, something was stirring, caught between trust and doubt. And in that very moment, the seed of suspicion began to take root. In the days following his conversation with Victoria, Ethan Walker was no longer the same. He still spoke to Maria, still nodded in greeting when they crossed paths in the hallway, but his voice had changed, colder, slower, and sometimes fractured, as if his mind were drifting elsewhere. Maria could feel it. She didn't know what had changed, only that his eyes no longer looked at her the way they once did. The warmth that used to linger there was now veiled by a thin layer of distance. During meals, Ethan often remained silent, absently twisting the old ring on his fourth finger. Lucas sat between them, eating quietly, his gaze moving from one to the other, sensing something was wrong, but not knowing how to name it. The fragile warmth of the house, the kind Maria and the boy had spent so long rebuilding, began to waver. One afternoon, Ethan decided to call a friend, a private investigator. His voice was low, laced with hesitation. "Yes, I just need confirmation. Right, her real name is Isabel Moore. Send me a copy of the file and, if possible, any details about her." 3 days later, the file arrived. He had hoped Victoria was wrong, but the truth was nothing like what he wanted to believe. That night, while Maria was reading a story to Lucas, Ethan passed by the room and watched. His mind churned with thoughts, and after quietly closing the door, he made his decision. He would let her go. Late that night, Ethan called Maria to the library. The room smelled of wood and faint smoke, the warm yellow light cast across his face, calm yet unyielding. "Miss Maria," he said, his voice deep and cold, I'm truly grateful for what you've done for Lucas, but you've done your part. You may go." Maria froze. She didn't understand. Her eyes searched his face for an answer, but all she found was distant frost. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Ethan turned away. "Nothing. I just think it's time." No explanation, no emotion. Maria remained silent, then bowed her head. She walked out of the library, her footsteps echoing down the long corridor, a lonely sound that pierced the night. The night sky hung heavy over the Walker mansion, draped in a gray shroud of silence. Maria walked slowly down the long corridor, her hand clutching the handle of her old suitcase. Each step echoed like the distant sound of something breaking apart. No one came to see her off. No goodbyes were spoken. Only the dim lights cast faint shadows on the walls, and the cold wind hissed through the window frames. When she reached the back door, her trembling hand touched the handle. And then a small voice called out behind her, soft, shaking, but filled with panic. "Maria, don't go." Maria froze. The suitcase slipped from her grasp and landed softly on the floor. She turned around, and at the end of the hallway stood Lucas, barefoot, his hair tousled, his face pale. He was trembling, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Maria, please don't leave me." Maria's throat tightened. Her heart felt as if it were being crushed. She dropped to her knees, arms open, but just as she was about to move toward him, Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase. "Lucas!" His voice cut through the air, firm and commanding. "Go back to your room now." The boy didn't move. Instead, Lucas ran forward and threw his arms around Maria, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt his hot, frantic breaths against her shoulder and the wild pounding of his tiny heart. "I don't want you to go. You promised you'd stay with me." Maria's tears fell freely. "I'm sorry. I'm not allowed to stay anymore." "Why?" he cried, his voice breaking, echoing through the corridor. "Did I do something wrong?" The question sliced into Ethan like a blade. He stood frozen, his gaze unsteady, Victoria's words echoing in his mind. Someone like her can't be trusted. Maria held Lucas close, gently running her fingers through his hair, whispering through the tremor in her voice. "No one did anything wrong, Lucas. Maria just has to go." Ethan stepped closer, his fists clenched, voice low and heavy. "That's enough. Let her go, before you hurt him more." Maria bent down, pressed a soft kiss to the boy's forehead. "I loves you. I will always love you." Then she gently pried his small hands from her clothes. Lucas struggled, sobbing, his cries shattering the silence of the night. Maria turned away and walked out. The wooden door closed behind her with a dry, final sound, a full stop to the warmth that had only just begun to bloom. Ethan stood there, watching his son collapse to the floor, screaming in despair. He wanted to move, but his feet felt nailed to the ground. "Maria!" Lucas screamed until his voice broke. "Maria, come back!" The cry tore through the still air, through every wall, piercing straight into the heart of the man standing motionless. Ethan shut his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. That night, the Walker house fell into silence once again. But this time, it was no longer a peaceful silence. It was thick, heavy, and filled with the breath of regret. Lucas sat curled up by his window. He wasn't crying anymore, just staring into the night, his eyes dry and hollow. Inside him, every sound had gone quiet. The rain, the wind, even Maria's familiar lullaby. Ethan stood outside the door, his hand on the knob, but he didn't dare to open it. He had heard his son cry himself hoarse when Maria left, heard the desperate calls of Mom echo until they broke into silence. And now, every time he passed that room, his heart clenched in pain. It was 2 a.m. Then a soft knock broke the stillness. Ethan looked up, and there stood Lucas, hair tousled, eyes red, clutching his worn-out teddy bear. "Dad!" The boy's voice was barely a whisper. Ethan set his glass of wine down and walked toward him. "Why aren't you asleep?" Lucas stepped closer, slowly, and lifted the bear in his small hands. "I brought this for you. There's something you need to hear inside." He handed Ethan a small recorder, then quietly walked back to his room. Ethan pressed play. And instantly, Victoria's voice filled the air, cold and sharp as a blade. "Don't talk to her. Do you hear me? If you do, I'll make her disappear. You'll never see Maria again." Then came the sound of Lucas's muffled sobs. "Why do you hate my mom?" Victoria's bitter laugh followed. "Because I'm going to be your father's wife, your mother. That's enough for her to leave. If she stays, she'll ruin everything." Ethan froze. His whole body went cold. The recorder trembled in his hand, each word cutting deep into his conscience. He jumped up and ran to Lucas's room. The boy was still sitting there, clutching his old bear. Ethan knelt down, his voice raw. "Lucas, did you hear what was on that recorder?" The boy nodded gently. "I know, I recorded it." Why didn't you tell me?" Lucas looked up, his eyes wet but steady with a rare courage for a child. "Because she said if I did, Mom would disappear forever." The words hit Ethan like a collapse from within. He pulled his son into his arms, his voice breaking. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." The next morning, as the first faint light filtered through the glass, Ethan was sitting in his study when the phone rang. On the other end was his private investigator, the one he'd hired to look into Maria's past. "Mr. Walker, I finished the investigation." "Go ahead," Ethan said, his tone low and tense. Maria Evans, or rather Isabel Moore, was indeed a pediatric nurse, but the accusations against her back then were a deliberate frame-up. "We have evidence. The child's mother was the one who administered the wrong medication, and she blamed Isabel to escape responsibility. The court never reopened the case, so Maria lost her license and custody of her child. We now have witness statements and the full records to prove it." Ethan gripped the phone tightly, his voice trembling. "Are you certain?" "We have certified copies of the documents. She was innocent. Completely." Ethan sat there, motionless. A single tear fell onto his desk, the tear of too late remorse. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Thank you. Now I know who was truly worth trusting." After the call with the detective ended, Ethan sat in silence in his study. Rain still fell beyond the glass, each droplet sliding down like the time he had let slip away in his mistakes. In front of him lay the file proving Maria's innocence, the papers trembling faintly beneath the desk lamp. On the table, Lucas's voice recorder still rested there, quiet yet unbearably heavy. Ethan reached out to touch it, closing his eyes. In his mind, he could still hear Lucas's small voice from the night before. "Dad, do you think Mom will forgive us?" Ethan didn't know, but for the first time in years, he truly felt the weight of fatherhood and the heart of a man learning how to love again. He stood up, put on his coat, and left the room. Lucas was still awake, sitting on the sofa with his teddy bear, eyes wide open. "Dad, are we going to find Mom?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, right now." The next morning, just as the rain stopped, a black car rolled along the suburban road. The city seemed washed clean of its old dust. Damp, pale light streamed through the window, casting over Ethan's weary but determined face. Lucas sat beside him, holding his father's hand tightly. Neither spoke. Between them, the silence was no longer a wall, but a bond, two hearts united in one direction. The car stopped before an old apartment building. The stairwell was narrow, the walls stained, the air thick with dampness. Ethan climbed each step, his heartbeat quickening. The wooden door opened. Maria stood there, her hair loose, her face thinner, but her eyes still as gentle and sad as before. For a long moment, no one could speak. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Maria, I don't know where to begin, but I was wrong. Terribly wrong." He pulled a folder from his coat pocket and placed it on the small table by the door. "These are the documents, proof that they were wrong about you. I know everything now." Maria looked at the papers, then back at him. "So, why are you here now, Ethan?" He met her gaze steadily. "To say I'm sorry, and to bring you home." Lucas stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Mom, I missed you so much. I was scared you wouldn't come back." Maria's hands shook. She knelt down, wrapping her arms around the boy as tears streamed down her face. "I'm here, Lucas. I'm not going anywhere." When she looked up again, Ethan was still standing there, silent, his eyes filled with sincere, aching remorse. "I can't change the past," he said softly, "but I want to make things right, if you'll let me." Maria said nothing. She didn't say yes, nor "I forgive you." She only nodded gently, then turned to gather a few small belongings, her eyes glistening. That small nod was enough to open the way home. That afternoon, the car stopped before the Walker estate. The house that once stood in gloom now shone brightly under the sun. But as they entered, Victoria was waiting in the hall, her face rigid, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mr. Walker, she's back?" Ethan took Maria's hand, his voice low and firm. "Yes, and this time she's not leaving." He stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "I know what you did, Victoria. I heard everything." She backed away, her voice faltering. "Mr. Walker, I was only trying to protect you and the boy." "You lied, manipulated, and made my son live in fear," Ethan interrupted coldly. "From now on, you no longer work here. Leave this house, now." Victoria's face went pale. For a brief moment she stood frozen, then turned and walked out through the grand doors. No excuse could save her now. When the door closed behind her, Ethan turned to Maria. "I promise, from now on, only truth and peace will remain in this house." Maria didn't reply. She simply smiled, a soft, gentle smile. The first smile he had seen in what felt like forever. The next day, Ethan used every connection and ounce of influence he had to reopen the old case. The files were brought before the court, along with new witness statements and the detective's evidence. 3 months later, the court declared Maria innocent. Her honor was restored, and most importantly, she regained custody of her daughter, Emma. Years passed. The Walker estate, once shrouded in darkness and sorrow, now overflowed with laughter. The cold walls were covered with colors and drawings by Lucas and Emma. The two children ran through the garden, their laughter echoing beneath the bright sunlight. On the porch, Ethan and Maria sat side by side. She wore a simple white dress, her hair tied back, her smile serene. He rested his arm around her shoulders, his eyes filled with the peace he had spent years searching for. Lucas ran up, holding a camera. "Dad! Mom! Let's take a family photo!" Ethan laughed, standing up. "All right, little photographer." Emma skipped after her brother, holding Maria's hand. "Mom, you stand in the middle." The four of them stood together beneath a canopy of white blossoms. Laughter filled the air, blending with the soft rustle of the wind. In the camera's frame, a moment was captured. A father who had once lost his way, a mother who had once been broken, and two children who had once lived in silence, now smiling together in the light. No more shadows, only love, forgiveness, and a whole family. This time, and forever.